People who take walks at night. What's the scariest thing you've seen?
During winter in a rural no-cell service kind of area. Completely dark, no street lights nor anyone in sight. Temperatures were around 20 and it was snowing. I was walking my dog with a flashlight. Then I heard someone start screaming bloody murder. Flight or fight kicked in. It truly sounded like someone was being stabbed to death for what seemed like forever. I chose to find out what the hell was going on. What I found instead was beyond anything I expected. He was a 5-year-old boy wandering down the road all alone. All he was wearing were light flannel pants and a thin t-shirt. No shoes or hat. And screaming so loudly it echoed through the hills. I dropped my dog's leash and walked up to him slowly. Gently and repeatedly telling him that I'm a mom and that he's going to be okay. I wrapped him into my arms and carried him to a neighbor's home to warm him by the fire and call for help. Edit. The boy's parents were visiting friends. The boy got up at night to look for his parents, who'd left him and his sister home, while they were out drinking. He got lost in the dark and just kept walking and screaming. Originally thinking I'd get in the crosshairs or witness some bloody domestic fight is what put my mind in the scared Poulos head space. Plus dark, no cell phones, no weapon.
He was so lucky to have been found by you. There was a story near me a few winters back where a 2-year-old girl got out at night in their new house. Just started learning how to unlock doors and she didn't know how to get back inside. A neighbor thought they heard crying and regretted not investigating further. The girl froze to death on the stairs behind their apartment.
One time I turned around to see what was behind me just out of intuition, and I saw someone step behind a tree rather quickly and try to hide from me. I stood there for a second to confirm this, then I speed walked home. Effin' creepy.
Speed walked. I would have Usain bolted out of there.
I'm an overnight security guard. One night I was watching cameras and saw someone underneath a grass tarp where some landscaping was taking place on our property. I was guessing this person had probably tried to stash something before they went into detox, which is next door to our property. I get over to the tarp and don't see the guy anywhere. So I start walking over the tarp and lifting it to look for any stashed items. Well, I ended up stepping on the poor homeless guy, scared the poo out of me. He was cool though and we fist bumped and he went on his way.
I worked night shift for 7 years. One night a young, thin blonde woman was walking down the street at 2 a.m. with no pants or underwear on and a button-up shirt open. I tried to ask if she needed help and she just stared forward, slowly walking, staring forward. I called the police and they came and stood in front of her and she slowly walked into the cop's hand and stopped. I didn't stay and went back to work. I still think about her and what the F was going on. I tell myself it was sleepwalking on Ambien or something, and that she wasn't just assaulted and in complete shock. I'll never know, but she was very pretty, and seemed well groomed. Was very strange.
My old man casually walked across the lobby of a 5-star hotel naked as a jaybird on Ambien.
One time I was walking around my relatively safe neighborhood with 2 of my friends after midnight. We were probably 16 at the time. This loud red truck speeds by us, which is normal for the road we were on. Then a few minutes later the same red truck drives by the opposite way going much slower. Again just a couple of minutes later he drives by but this time stops 100 or so feet away from us and just sits there. Realizing that this is not normal we booked it through the yard to the next street over. For the next 20 or so minutes we see this truck creeping up and down the neighborhood while we hid behind some bushes, and when we finally thought he was gone, we booked it to my house. He turned the corner onto my road just as we were about to open my front door.
Totally understand that you were kids and it was late and it happened a while ago, but for anyone reading, if you think you're being followed, do not lead them back to your home. Find a well-lit, public place as soon as possible and contact the police.
Well, in our defense, this neighborhood is like 5 miles away from town down a dark New England road. You're not wrong though.
Dead body on the side of the street with a sign around its neck saying, "I'm a cell phone thief, don't be like me." This was maybe 20 years ago in Manila, Philippines.
Happened to my grandfather too. He was walking our dog at 5 a.m. Dog went to do his business near a dark, grassy empty lot and they found a dead body bound up with a sign on him saying he was a thief. This practice is called salvage in the Philippines. Basically an extrajudicial killing done by policemen or vigilantes on criminals and D-addicts or suspected criminals. It's basically been going on way before Duterte took office, but it's only with him it was somewhat institutionalized and blatant. Before that, the police didn't brandish it with so much impunity, and didn't dare target teens or grandmothers. Nowadays most of the poor are fair game. If you have money and connections you can still buy your way out of things.
I worked night shift on Kadena AB on Okinawa, Japan. I started walking to work because I didn't have a car. I really enjoyed the walks. It was a good way to wind down after work as the nights were cool and quiet and I could listen to my music without worrying about anyone else around. One night while walking home I heard some rustling in the jungle of trees on the way home. Next thing I know all of the lights went black and all I felt was a loud whoosh coming right at my head. I screamed like a little girl, ran, and dropped my iPod. It broke. Once I made it past the trees I realized it was one of the giant bats, Link.
I once saw tiny hands reaching out of a sewer grate. Took me a minute before I realized it was a raccoon.
Must be because of the thumbs. They have thumbs.
Found a guy who hanged himself in a park. Called 911 and answered some questions. Was a long night. I changed hung to hanged.
I found a OD guy and the damn police questioned me for 6 hours until the medical people said he OD. Edit, lol Reddit made me laugh but OD stands for overdosed. The guy overdosed on heroin. I was 22 when I found the guy in a high traffic area. I was the only one to stop. I yelled at him but noticed his stomach wasn't moving and he had pale skin. Called 911. The detectives questioned me and it took 6 hours to clear the scene. They detained me the whole time before they allowed me to go.
Almost 100% sure I witnessed a kidnapping. I was going to get my mail late at night while living in an apartment complex and on the way back I noticed a woman in her pajamas surrounded by a few men right by a car. There was an argument and looked like they forced her in the car and drove off. I found her slipper nearby on the grass. I of course called the police and they came and I let them know what I saw but I never found out what actually happened.
Similar experience here. In high school, late at night walking home from a friend's house maybe a mile away. Halfway car comes cruising super slowly down the street. I hear someone screaming in the car. I was sure they were calling for help. I start following the car, and as I get on the phone with the cops the car starts pumping the gas, so I just run after them and try to follow them, but I lost them pretty quickly. Never learned what really happened.
I hate the lack of resolution, like I want to know if this person ended up okay or not. I still think about it and worry about what happened. I just always remember finding that slipper and chills going down my spine.
An old man who walked very aggressively. Like Jason from Friday the 13th but sped up. I was ready to run but I walked past him and nothing happened. Put me on my toes but holy poo, change your walking form, man.
He's just built different.
What I thought was a body in the woods, and after a bit of back and forth on the phone with the police I returned with a few helpful coppers to find a slightly miffed drunk person who'd had an argument with his missus.
What was there to go back and forth about? Body in the woods isn't emergency enough. Tears of joy, tears of joy.
Was up on a hill in the countryside at midnight when a man with a rifle came out of nowhere, ran right past me, and wasn't seen again. I went home shortly after that.
Damn these Civil War ghosts always running around.
Was out for a late walk in the rain. Always enjoy it because it's peaceful, smells great, quiet and never see anyone. Walked off this trail back into the road and saw a big pile of garbage under a tarp at the end of the cul-de-sac the trail ends in. Got a creepy chill, like that could be a dead body or something and I'd never know. Just got a weird feeling that snapped me out of my calm walk. Picked up the pace. About 500 YDS away, parked car with a guy sitting there, in the dark, in the rain, like 11 p.m. car off, just sitting there. Got super creeped out at this point and changed my route back to the main road and hurried home. Turns out it was a dead body someone had dumped under that tarp, was under there for 4 days before someone investigated it. The guy in the car turned out to be just a random dude, guy lives there and totally unrelated to the body. Still, took a few months off from my late night walks alone in the woods.
Living in a rural village, I was taking a late night walk with my GF, when suddenly we hear aloud what we thought was a human scream. Turned out it was a sheep. Jump scared us hard though.
Oh man. When my wife and I were stoners, we took our bong out back and we turned the lights off, and when I was mid-hit I hear a god-awful scream followed by the ground pounding of something large running to use from the woods. My wife ran in and slammed the door behind her and I almost couldn't get in. Found out a few months later it was a deer screaming and it jumped over the broken fence. I was super stoned and that was the most awful experience I've ever had because I couldn't move fast enough. Edit. This is the closest video I could find that's short. Most ungodly scream. Link.
A 7 feet tall male brown kangaroo in the middle of the footpath. Buff as F, just staring me down. You bet your ass I turned and went the other way. He just went about his business.
There was news report a while ago about a super large and buff kangaroo that would beat up dog walkers. Safe to say that I'm not going to Australia anytime soon.
A bear right up the street. Or, maybe, an empty baby carriage on the side of the road.
The baby carriage thing is just making me think of that part in BioShock.
I saw a tarantula use a crosswalk as if it was a law-abiding pedestrian.
The dude was just trying to be a good example for the other spiders.
2 deer fighting, then yelling at each other, then having sex.
Well, that was an adventure in a few words.
Iguana fell out of a tree on an unseasonably cool night.
I have never before seen this sentence. Edit. Till this is not uncommon in South Florida. Crazy, and entertaining. While I'm here, I'd like to highlight that I have been alerted to the existence of a sub devoted to the phenomenon of brand new sentences. Well alerted, thanks.
Yeah, in the winter months when we get cold fronts, the damn things go into a low power mode kind of stasis and fall out of the trees. They're usually fine unless a car runs them over. Once it warms up they go back to normal.
A man on a bike passed me and he wore a jacket, shoes, and a hat, but no pants or underwear. At first I couldn't believe that I just saw his bare ass. Edit typo.
They saw 2 moons that night.
A gigantic mother moose and her baby about 30 yards away.
Glad you made it out of that situation alive.
Seeing is scary, but hearing and not seeing is effing terrifying.
You bet it is. A good example I can bring to the table is the sound of a rabbit screaming while you hear the low growling of either a raccoon or a cougar trying to silence it. I hope it wasn't the latter, because this happened right near my backyard.
I heard the same, but it was an owl shredding the rabbit. I did not expect it to be such a big bird. It was like a fire hydrant covered with feathers sitting there munching on Thumper. Many years ago my boyfriend and I decided to take a late night walk around his generally safe neighborhood. We got a few steps past the driveway when a shirtless guy came running over with a hammer in one hand, and a machete in the other. My boyfriend stayed super calm and asked the man what was going on. Apparently, some man had just broken into his apartment and tried to kidnap his young daughter, so he was chasing him down to either shatter his fingers with the hammer or chop off his hands entirely with the machete, and he thought my boyfriend was possibly this man. My boyfriend gave me his car keys and told me to take myself home. We lived apart at the time, so I went and got his car, and by the time I was backing out of the driveway, the man was screaming at my boyfriend, who was just standing there calmly with his hands in the air. I drove a block away so the man wouldn't see me, rolled the windows down to try to hear what was happening, and called the cops. The machete man ended up running off and I don't know if they ever got him. My boyfriend was fine though, thank God. And #X200B. Edit typo.
Greater than. So he was chasing him down to either shatter his fingers with the hammer or chop off his hands entirely with the machete. I like how he was keeping his options open.
More backpacking than a walk, but this effing terrifies me to this day. Our planned camping spot for the night was full. We'd backpacked all day to get to that location and there wasn't anywhere close to set up our tents. We called our guy, on the outside, to come pick us up as it was getting late. We didn't have anywhere to set up camp, and a storm was approaching. We hiked to the nearest exit point on the trail, met our pickup guy, and he drove us a few miles to the nearest campsite we were familiar with that we could basically drive up to. Long logging path pretty deep in the mountains that we had hiked to in previous years, so we were kinda familiar with the area. Anyways, we hop out of the van and it's pitch black out. No moon, it's April in the mountains and still pretty chilly. We're cold, hungry, and exhausted. That's when we notice this motherfucker staring at us from behind a tree. I know this sounds like a no-sleep story, but it's 100% true and probably the most scared I've ever been. We notice this guy, no headlamp, no equipment, no backpack, just standing there. One of our group, former Marine, yells at him to come out and explain what his deal is. This guy walks a few feet out from behind the tree and we all shine our lights on him, and I poo you not, this dude's white t-shirt is covered in what looks like blood smears. He's pretty rough looking, long hair, long beard, crazy eyes, and he was wearing a bloody t-shirt and shorts in 35-degree weather at night. We're all pretty freaked out, and this is a pretty experienced group of hikers who've seen some poo. We ask this guy what his deal is and he says we can't camp here. We tell him that that's exactly what we plan to do, and he says, I don't think that's a good idea for any of you. We kind of turn to discuss as a group, and when we look back he's hidden back behind the tree. As a group we basically decided none of us were getting any sleep that night if we stayed here, so we packed up the van and left. As we were pulling out, this guy pulled out one of those red filtered flashlights and ran after our van. I'm not kidding, he followed us for at least a quarter mile on foot. He was fast as F. We passed a park ranger on the road and flagged him down to tell him how weird that dude was acting, and he said he'd go investigate. I didn't hear anything about it again for 5 years. For the longest time I thought he was probably some pot farmer who had a nearby plot, or a moonshiner who was just living in the woods and didn't want us near his still. People hunt all the time out there, which would maybe explain the blood a little bit. But I was recently at an event with some of those guys again for the first time in years, and that creepy dude from the woods got brought up. One of them who still lives nearby broke out his phone and said, I forgot to tell you guys, I saw him again. Pulls up a news article and there he was. So obviously the same guy. He'd been arrested for murdering some poor girl on the trail. Timelines didn't match up, so I fully believe we saw this guy shortly after he'd murdered someone else. He hasn't been charged with anything else as far as I'm aware. I'm not backpacking without a gun anymore.
It might be worth contacting the detective who led the investigation and letting him know what you saw and when. Could bring closure for another family who don't know what happened to their loved one. Edit. Typo.
I'll ask my buddy who still lives in the area about this. He might have already done so, but you're right, it couldn't hurt. The ranger created an incident report when we spoke to him, so they might be able to connect some dots.
A couple years ago, I was at the start of a typical weekday night stroll. I was living in an apartment complex in Florida at the time, so it was the only opportune time to do so, without being completely drenched. The exact moment I was crossing the sidewalk adjacent to the entrance of said complex, I witnessed a middle-aged dude punch his wife, significant other in her face, in full view of me, and another passerby. The passerby called the cops, the dude was arrested. It wasn't a scary situation to my own well-being, but I did find the situation chilling. For one, how nonchalant the guy was in assaulting his wife, so in public, and two, how both the abuser, so were pleading for the cops not to be called. It was domestic abuse so normalized, it happened in full public, without any second-thought rationale.
That's crazy. When I lived in Florida, my husband and I were taking a walk at night. We saw a husband straight choke his partner and throw her phone across the parking lot of our complex. The wife hollered that she wouldn't be back, but we would hear them say that kind of stuff all the time. Anyway, we called the cops. The cops said she didn't want to press charges, so they couldn't do anything. Edit. A lot of people are saying that charges can be pressed even if you yourself don't press them. That may be the case. I'm just saying what the cops said to me.
A dude was following me around for a solid 10 minutes in a car. When I confronted the guy, he was just a Uber person who was lost.
Another person walking at night.
Especially if it's on an uncommon pathway.
Seen someone overdose, OD, on the sidewalk, not a pleasant birthday memory.
I once walked over a homeless guy sleeping on the sidewalk in front of my apartment. It is a common occurrence, though usually they are polite enough to do it on the lawn instead. A few hours later I hear a siren and see them load him in a stretcher into the ambulance. So maybe that wasn't someone sleeping. 2 words, rabid squirrels. There was an outbreak of rabies in a squirrel population in my neighborhood my senior year of high school. My BF at the time lived about a 20-minute walk away and neither of us drove, so we frequently had to walk through rabid squirrel territory. In the middle of the night, hearing them make noises like something out of a motherfucking zombie movie while skittering above you when it's too dark to see them is horrifying. 0 tenths would not recommend. In college I would walk back from the library very late. One night I was walking back to my dorm and something told me to look up. On top of the parking garage there was a person glaring over looking like they were about to jump. I had no clue what to do, so I called the police. As soon as I looked back up they jumped to safety. I ran up the stairs to find them but couldn't. The police never found them either. Either way, I hope they are okay today. Edit. Forgot to include that on that same night at the neighboring college someone else jumped off a parking garage. I've always wondered if the two people are connected.
Some guy talking to himself and flogging his back with something whip-like. Clearly he had mental issues, but I didn't find him very threatening.
I was walking one night in a pretty dark back road near my house at the time when glowing eyes on a round black body came bulleting at me. I shrieked like a child and felt super dumb when it turned out to be a big-ass black lab who got to my feet and rolled over wagging his tail and wiggling about. He belonged to someone in the neighborhood who was taking him on a walk and ran from them when he saw me. He was a big floofy boy who just wanted love. I seriously felt so embarrassed but also had a laugh. So did his owner. Lol.
I live out in the country, more woods and fields around me than houses. There are several dirt paths through the woods that farmers use for their tractors and all during the day. I like to run on these paths because it's usually quiet and no traffic, unlike the road. During the hottest part of the summer I run at night because it's cooler outside. So one night, it had rained during the day, so all the tracks on the path were gone. I was out running around midnight. I had an uneasy feeling but didn't see anything. But then I circled around and on my second pass down a particular way, I saw my footprints, but then I saw another set of prints, bigger than mine, that hadn't been there before. Then I saw they made the turn the same way I had earlier. I cut it short that night, never saw anyone, but still. Wow, I did not expect all this. Lol. Thanks for the awards.
The parts of the path where you only saw one pair of footprints. That's when Bigfoot was carrying you.
I'm the person I'm most scared of in this story. It was around 9 p.m. and I was cleaning my apartment and I looked up what time this takeout restaurant closed. It was like a 5-minute walk and less than a block from where I work, so I take this walk often. I was drinking but I wasn't drunk. I was just going to pick up some food in about an hour, go home, eat, and get some sleep. That's the last thing I remember, up until I woke up crossing the street to the restaurant. Immediately feel for my pockets for my phone, it's not there, no wallet in my pocket, keys, where are my keys? They are always in my right jacket pocket because that's how I lock my door. I find them in my offhand pocket. Then I look around. The normally busy bar-covered intersection is a ghost town. Enter panic mode. I turn around and start walking home. The first thing I notice is the giant McDonald's sign is off. They close at 11, I know this. Start listening for cars and there is nothing. Walk a little more briskly and the pizza place I frequent has its sign off. They close at 3. I pick up my pace just trying to get home as quick as I can. I get half a block from my apartment building and the only person anywhere around me bikes past me. Then turns around and circles me. I freeze and look at him out of the corner of my eye. He pedals off and I sprint to my door. My door lock was always kinda janky to the point where I was the only person who could lock it easily. The mechanism just wasn't secure. I get to my door and find it locked. Edit, get inside. Grab my phone, crazed about what time it is. It's dead. It took what felt like an eternity to finally get it to charge and turn on. It's gaining in 5 in the morning. Something switched off on me around 9 p.m., slept for 7 hours, then I locked a broken lock with my left hand and walked 5 blocks before I snapped back. I'll never forget that moment of slowly realizing where I was and not understanding what was wrong.
Dude, I would see a neurologist.
Once walking home from the convenience store, a well-known Rottweiler stray dog came sprinting across the street in front of me. When I turned to see what he was running from, I was greeted with an angry skunk running directly into my path. Ran all the way home scared to death of getting sprayed.
I tried an electric bike my aunt had while we were visiting. I wasn't used to how abruptly it would accelerate, so when it did, I yelled for a second. My cousin was taking a video of me the whole time because I most probably would have done something to make an absolute fool out of myself, like crashing, and it would have been hilarious. So there I was, riding to the end of the street and turning back around when I noticed a lot of men holding large rocks in their hands, barefoot, came by as if they're hunting someone down. We were then told to come inside immediately as someone had just taken a machete and started attacking people at a party just around the corner where we were having a party. Later that night, we replayed the video and we noticed that when the bike accelerated and I yelled, a man walking in front of me was holding a machete. He startledly whipped around and glanced at me. We're glad he didn't swing the machete. He was so close he wouldn't have missed. He matched the description of the man who hacked random and multiple people that day.
That's scary AF.
Close to Halloween, I went on a walk with a family member and a bunch of kids were gathered outside their houses with Halloween masks just staring at people walking by.
The street I walked down where once there was a cat killer on that street who cut off a cat head and placed it there.
Today it's cats, tomorrow it's people. Be careful on that street.
I was hanging out with a friend one day and lost track of time. When night fell, I got on my bike to ride home, and about halfway home I saw a figure standing under a street lamp. Being a teenager, I said F that and went to turn around until I realized I was already too far to turn back, so I turned back around to brave the night and the figure was gone. There was no way he could have ran off in that time without me seeing him. Needless to say, I hauled ass home.
When I was in middle school, most school nights I had to walk about 1/10 of a mile or so to my grandparents' house to stay the night as my mom worked nights at the time. So I usually did this right as it was turning night to maximize my time at home. Curfew was nightfall, so usually it was a run. Well, at this point in my life I had never seen a coyote and always wondered if I were to get attacked, could I survive? The thought was there basically every trip, and I had no desire to find out. Well, I moved in with my dad after 8th grade, and when I was in 10th or 11th grade one was visiting my mom. I had to go grab something from my grandparents' house, and took a bicycle of a younger sibling. So I remembered all those nights before with that thought, but now I was a lot more buff than I had been back then. But I still didn't want to find out. Well, on the way back I glanced out to a pasture beside me that was overgrown. There was a figure running parallel with me, keeping pace easily. I was like, holy F, it's happening, and pedaled super fast. I entered my mom's driveway, and heard the creature coming across the road. Her yard was sloped downhill, so I let the bicycle coast down and I leapt off and full of adrenaline flexed with my arms in front of me and screamed, let's go. It was my mom's dog. I felt relieved but also disappointed because of the adrenaline rush lol, but definitely relieved. Found out later coyotes are tiny anyway, not that I'd want to fight one.
Coyotes are also absolute chicken poos in most any one-on-one situation. They'll typically run if confronted alone. Note: for anyone reading this and feeling relieved, do be aware that this doesn't hold true if you have a small pet with you. A single coyote absolutely will go after something smaller than itself, especially when hungry, desperate. Secondary note: it's also important to know that a solo coyote is rare. If you see one, chances are there are several more very close by. One of the common hunting tactics for a coyote pack is for one to be seen by you and become the distraction. Never underestimate the threat coyotes pose just because they're smaller than most medium-sized dogs. Just a few of them can easily take down us and our dogs.
As someone who used to make sure trains had an adequate coating of paint, I spent a good amount of time walking around the rougher sides of town at night. Worst thing I ever saw was in Seattle, was walking down the street under an overpass in an industrial district and a homeless woman asked if I could buy her a beer since she didn't have an ID. Bought her a 40, talked to her about her daughters, watched her smoke meth, all in about 2 minutes. She started reading to me from a lightly singed Bible, about the devil specifically, at which point I was looking for a quick and polite exit. Who doesn't when someone whips out the Bible? At which point 3 men rode by with a gallon jug, and doused her tent in something, maybe gasoline, perhaps turpentine or kerosene, really didn't stick around to find out. Lit her tent on fire. She ran into the burning tent. I'll never forget watching her run out screaming and crying, holding a duffel bag, her white coat completely engulfed in flames. I took off running. Guys on bikes didn't look thrilled to see me, called SPD, but they didn't seem to care much after I told them what part of Soto I saw it happen in. Hid amongst the trains for a few hours after that. Edit. Out of curiosity for the situation, I took a picture while she was reading from the Bible because I thought, no way my friends will believe someone was street preaching to me. Bible picture, link. I was walking around Bangalore, India at night by myself. I was a 20-year-old American girl on study abroad. All of a sudden, I saw a giant rat climb out from a sewer. It was bigger than I knew rats could even be. Bigger than the biggest rat depicted in movies or books. It was about the size of a small dog. I was shook. Then, out from the same sewer grate, another gigantic rat. And another. And another. About 5 or 6 dirty rats were all climbing out of the same sewer, and I was about to have to face them all on my own. I was terrified and I knew no one would ever believe me, but there was no way to get away from them or change direction. So, I pull out my phone to try and use the flashlight to scare them off. I direct the light at them and every single one looked right at me. They're dark and dirty and now they were running directly at me. But wait. I was wrong. Puppies. They weren't rats at all but a whole litter of dirty puppies that had been hiding in the sewer together. Still gross but also way cuter and less scary than expected. WTF India.
Greater than I was walking around Bangalore, India at night by myself. Greater than I was a 20-year-old American girl on study abroad. Holy F, every single Indian girl I know would cringe at that. Hell, some of the guys would. Not really scary, but once saw 2 dudes having a legit practice duel with those expensive sturdy lightsabers.
A chemically imbalanced bum raving at the top of his lungs, stumbling in and out of the street. He was a literal bloody mess, stunk to Hades. Just me and him on the street at 4:30 a.m. Usually just me and the joggers and that one soccer mom on her bike.
Walking the dog at night, when I got home, 2 shifty dudes was waiting outside my house. They asked if Haley was inside. I said there's no Haley in my home. They pushed for more, giving me a description of this Haley. I said no again, and offered to ask the local police or something since they weren't from the area. They left, but not really, they waited in a car that didn't belong on my street. Haley was my next-door neighbor's daughter, so I was pretty pissed off that my address was used for some reason, but I wasn't going to tell 2 random assholes where she lived either. I looked outside the window from upstairs in the dark. They were parked outside. Left after maybe 15 minutes. I was ready to call the police if they hung about longer. I called Haley's dad about it since he was on a taxi shift. He didn't know them. Next day, both Haley and he came over to ask about it. Haley feigned ignorance, claiming she didn't know them either. The matter didn't go as far as that, but I was mildly on alert for a couple of weeks since then. This happened before COVID lockdown. Edit. Additional info, conjecture. I'm friendly with the neighbor. He is a taxi driver and fixes cars, so he looks at my car if I have a problem. I take his parcels when he's not in. I am not friendly with Haley. She's in her 20s, and pretty and blonde. I am polite to her but feels like anything more would come across as creepy. I'm not connected to her socially or anything further than Facebook. Rest is conjecture. Judging by what I know of her, she's a party girl. She does live it up a bit. That's not an issue. She did have an ex-boyfriend who are now not together. They had a kid together. It was messy insofar as they used to have massive screaming matches right outside the house. He seems like an asshole. Turns up in either a van, a builder, or an expensive-looking BMW. I knew her ex from school. He was younger than me but a few years and was a bit of a DK. So either he did something or she did something and brought poo onto my doorstep. He could most possibly be a dealer, but I'm biased and this is just conjecture. I have no proof and I'm not friends with Haley for her to actually tell me. The general vibe was that she dodged a bullet. Not literally, but those guys definitely was looking for her and not for a nice friendly chat. And yeah, if she was the one messing around pissing off random dudes, giving a fake address which is next door to the real one sounds pretty dumb. I'm not on bad terms with her in any way, so I don't think she would have done something like that to mess with me.
This one happened to me a few years ago when I was in my early 30s. I live in a Southern California coastal town near a major university but close enough to wilderness areas that encounters with skunks, possums, and raccoons are a daily, nightly part of life. I had a somewhat timid pit bull. A past housemate locked himself out of the house and had to break in. When he finally got back in, he found my dog hiding under a table crying, who sometimes demanded late-night walks before bed. Her favorite route was near my house around a large local park along a key thoroughfare between a shopping hub for the local community and the university. The park is sporadically lit and home to critters and occasionally transients. It's also, due to one of those weird flukes of weather and geography, always several degrees colder than the surrounding areas and sometimes home to spooky-ass ground fog. So on this particular fall evening a few years back, my dog and I were walking around the park at about 11 p.m. We approach one of the poorly lit sections of the park exterior, which has high bushes separating the sidewalk from the parking lot and/or park itself. The bushes are right on the edge of the sidewalk and about arm's length in width. All of a sudden my dog starts freaking out. Like full-on attack mode with deep barking and snarling. This was completely out of nowhere, no rustling noises or anything else you would expect to evoke that kind of reaction, and totally uncharacteristic for her. Typically when she spotted a raccoon or skunk, she was more curious about the weird animal in front of her than anything else, or she would start loudly crying and embarrassing herself. But she almost never flipped out. I immediately yank her away from the bush and run down the sidewalk, thinking, oh poo, we're about to be skunked. After 25 yards or so, I turn around, pull out my pocket flashlight, dog still freaking out in the meantime, and shine it back toward the bush, expecting to see a critter saunter away slowly. Instead, we see a man emerge from what I later found out was a hollowed-out section of the bush on the other side of the sidewalk. He very casually stood up and looked at us. He looked to be in his late 30s, early 40s and was quite clearly not homeless. He was dressed like a suburban dad, jeans and windbreaker, and appeared to be completely sober. I remember noticing that he was wearing dress shoes and fixating on how out of place it seemed. A bit of background info: I am a big dude, somewhere in the ballpark of 8,320 pounds, and I spent a number of years moonlighting as a bouncer at a local bar, so I can spot a drunk pretty easily. After the initial shock of what I was seeing wore off, I mustered my best scary bouncer voice and shouted, "What the F do you think you're doing?" while my dog was still going ape-poo. The guy took off running at a full sprint toward my neighborhood. I called the police, there's a sheriff's substation at the shopping center less than a mile away, and explained what I had just seen. For the rest of our walk, multiple police cars were patrolling the park and the neighborhood with spotlights shining the entire time. From what I understand, they never found the guy. I have no idea what he was doing in the bushes or what would have happened if somebody other than me and my dog had walked by. The bush was uprooted a few years ago, but I still think about it every time I walk on that side of the park.
I remember years ago walking my dog on a dark December evening having a similar encounter. My dog is a 14-kilo cockapoo, really friendly and loves getting petted from everyone he meets. We're coming out of a dimly lit lane that ran behind a local school, and this 6'5" older guy approaches from off the path and is trying to chat and get closer, starts saying, "Oh, that's a nice dog, can I pet him?" I'm feeling a bit weirded out because why is some random trying to chat on a freezing cold night when I'm just wanting home? Dude reaches a hand out and I just hear this very loud deep primal growl which rises to a rasping snarl. I look at my pup and just see the light reflecting off his eyes and his teeth, which are fully out. His coat is pure black and matte rather than shiny, so this is all you could see of him. Never seen him like this ever, and he's all of a sudden firing out the scary big dog noises. The guy backs off, so I'm just like, "Don't think he likes you," and he walks off at a brisk pace. It was just weird seeing my fluffy pal flip like that. Don't know if he picked up my uneasiness or some sketchy intention from the guy, but decided to give him some extra dog snacks when we got in.
Thank you for watching. We upload new videos every day, so be sure to come back for more fun. Please consider liking and subscribing if you enjoyed the video.